The blizzard arrived without mercy in December of 1879, sweeping through Yosemite Valley in California with a fury that no one had predicted, trapping Sarah Patterson alone in a stagecoach that had overturned 3 miles outside of town when the horses panicked and bolted into a ravine. Xavier York had been riding back from checking his cattle in the high pastures when he heard the desperate cry for help cutting through the howling wind, a sound so faint he almost missed it beneath the roar of the storm. He urged his horse forward through the knee-deep snow, following the sound until he spotted the overturned coach, its wheels spinning uselessly in the air, and a woman's gloved hand waving frantically from a window. Xavier dismounted quickly, his boots sinking into the fresh powder as he fought his way to the coach. The temperature had dropped so severely that his breath came out in thick clouds, and ice had already begun forming on his mustache and the brim of his hat. When he reached the vehicle, he found a young woman trapped inside, her dress caught beneath a trunk that had shifted during the crash. Her face was pale, lips tinged blue from the cold, but her dark eyes blazed with determination to survive. "Hold still," Xavier said, his voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. "I am going to get you out." Sarah nodded, her teeth chattering too violently to speak. She watched as this stranger, bundled in a heavy coat and chaps, worked to free her from the wreckage. His hands were strong and sure as he lifted the trunk enough for her to pull her skirts free. The fabric tore with a ripping sound, but she was loose. "Can you move?" Xavier asked, reaching for her hand. "I think so," Sarah managed, though her legs felt numb from the cold and from being pinned in the same position for what must have been an hour. She took his offered hand, and he pulled her through the window opening with surprising gentleness given the circumstances. The moment she was free of the coach, the full force of the blizzard hit her, and she staggered against him. "My horse can carry us both," Xavier said, supporting her weight as they trudged through the snow. "There is a line shack about a mile west. We will freeze if we try to make it back to town in this weather." Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to insist on proper propriety, but she was a practical woman who had been raised on a ranch in Nevada before her father lost everything to bad debts and drink. She knew the wilderness well enough to recognize when survival trumped social convention. She nodded her agreement, and Xavier helped her into the saddle before swinging up behind her. His arms came around her to grip the reins, and she felt the solid warmth of his chest against her back as he urged the horse forward into the white storm. The ride to the line shack seemed to take forever and no time at all. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, the cold seeping into her bones despite Xavier's body heat behind her. She felt him talking to her, his voice low and insistent, telling her to stay awake, to hold on just a little longer. She tried to focus on his words, on the rumble of his voice against her back, on anything except the bone-deep cold that made her want to close her eyes and sleep. When they finally reached the small wooden structure, Xavier dismounted and caught Sarah as she slid from the saddle. Her legs would not support her weight, and he swept her into his arms, carrying her inside while his horse followed them into the attached lean-to that served as a stable. The interior of the shack was dark and nearly as cold as outside, but at least they were protected from the wind. Xavier set Sarah down on the single cot in the corner and immediately set about building a fire in the small stove. His hands worked quickly, efficiently, striking flint and tinder until a small flame caught. He fed it carefully with kindling, then larger pieces of wood from the stack against the wall. Within minutes, heat began radiating from the iron stove, and Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the relief of it. "We need to get you out of those wet clothes," Xavier said, not looking at her as he spoke. His tone was matter-of-fact, clinical even. You will catch your death if you stay in them." Sarah knew he was right, but embarrassment still flooded her cheeks with color. "I can manage," she said, though her fingers were so stiff and numb she could barely feel them, let alone work the buttons of her coat. Xavier finally looked at her, his gray eyes serious. "Miss, I am not trying to compromise you. I am trying to keep you alive. There are blankets in that chest, and I will turn my back while you change. But you need to get warm and dry now." The authority in his voice brooked no argument, and Sarah found herself nodding. Xavier turned away, busying himself with tending to his horse in the lean-to while Sarah struggled out of her wet garments. Her fingers fumbled uselessly at buttons and laces, and more than once she nearly gave up in frustration. Finally, she was down to her chemise and drawers, which were thankfully only damp rather than soaked through. She wrapped herself in 2 thick wool blankets from the chest and called out that she was decent. Xavier returned from the lean-to, carrying his saddlebags. He set them down near the stove and began unpacking supplies. Sarah watched him work, noticing for the first time the details of his appearance. He was tall, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and needed a trim. His face was weathered from years in the sun, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though his expression now was one of focused concentration. He had a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of beard, and his hands were calloused and scarred from hard work. "I have some jerky and hardtack," Xavier said, pulling the items from his bags. "Not much of a meal, but it will keep your strength up." "Thank you," Sarah said, accepting the food he offered. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not found me." "You would have frozen," Xavier said bluntly, then seemed to realize how harsh that sounded. "I am glad I was riding that way. What were you doing traveling alone in weather like this?" Sarah took a bite of the jerky, chewing slowly as she considered how much to tell this stranger. "I was on my way to meet my intended husband in San Francisco. He arranged for the stage passage, but obviously he did not account for the weather." Something flickered across Xavier's face, but it was gone before Sarah could identify it. "I see. Well, once this storm passes, I will make sure you get to the next stage station." They sat in awkward silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howling wind outside. Sarah studied Xavier covertly, wondering about this man who had saved her life. He had an honest face, she decided, and kind eyes despite his gruff manner. There was something solid about him, dependable. "I am Sarah Patterson," she said finally, breaking the silence. "From Carson City originally." "Xavier York," he replied, meeting her gaze. "My family has a ranch about 10 miles south of Yosemite. I was checking on some cattle in the high pastures when the storm hit." "You live here year-round?" Sarah asked, surprised. "I heard the winters in the valley can be brutal." "They can be," Xavier agreed. "But the land is good, and the cattle thrive here. My father settled this ranch 20 years ago, and I took it over when he died 3 years back." "I am sorry for your loss," Sarah said softly. Xavier nodded his acknowledgement. "He lived a good life, died doing what he loved, working the land." Night fell quickly, the darkness outside absolute. The small shack became their entire world, the fire their sun. Xavier insisted Sarah take the cot, and he made himself a pallet on the floor near the stove. Sarah protested at first, but he was immovable on the subject. "You have been through an ordeal," he said firmly. "You need proper rest. I have slept in worse places than this floor, believe me." Sarah lay in the cot, wrapped in her blankets, listening to the storm rage outside. She thought about her intended husband, Marcus Whitfield, a man she had never met, but who had corresponded with her father before his death. Marcus was a banker in San Francisco, wealthy and established. and he had agreed to marry Sarah sight unseen based on a photograph and her father's assurances of her good character and skills as a homemaker. It was a practical arrangement, one that would save Sarah from destitution after her father's debts consumed everything they owned. But lying in the darkness, listening to Xavier's steady breathing from the floor, Sarah found herself wondering what it would be like to marry for something other than practicality. To marry someone who looked at her with warmth rather than calculation, who made her feel safe the way Xavier had when he pulled her from that overturned coach. She pushed the thoughts away. It was foolish to romanticize the situation. Xavier had done his Christian duty, nothing more. Tomorrow, or whenever the storm broke, they would go their separate ways, and she would continue on to San Francisco to become Mrs. Marcus Whitfield. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 long days trapped in the small line shack with a man Sarah had just met, and yet it felt like she had known Xavier York her entire life. They talked to pass the time, sharing stories of their pasts. Sarah learned that Xavier had a younger sister named Emma who was married to a shopkeeper in Sacramento, that he loved horses more than cattle but raised cattle because they were more profitable, that his mother had died giving birth to Emma, and he had helped raise his sister while also learning to run the ranch. Xavier learned that Sarah's mother had been a school teacher who died of influenza when Sarah was 12, that Sarah could read Latin and Greek, that she played the piano beautifully, and that she had once dreamed of becoming a teacher herself before her father's financial troubles made such dreams impossible. He learned that she was 22 years old, that she was practical to a fault, and that she had a quiet strength that he found himself admiring more with each passing hour. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, the storm finally broke. The wind died down, and weak sunlight filtered through the cracks in the wooden walls. Xavier opened the door to assess the conditions and found nearly 4 feet of snow piled against the shack. It would be difficult traveling, but possible. "We should be able to make it back to town today," he said, turning back to Sarah. "The going will be slow, but my horse is strong." Sarah felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. "Of course. I am sure you are eager to get back to your ranch." Xavier was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was careful. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Do you love this man you are going to marry?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "I have never met him. How could I love him?" "That is not an answer," Xavier pressed. "Do you want to marry him?" Sarah stood, still wrapped in her blankets, and turned away so Xavier would not see her face. "What I want is not relevant. I have no money, no family, and no prospects. Marcus Whitfield is offering me security and respectability." "What more could I ask for?" "Happiness," Xavier said quietly. "You could ask for happiness." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Happiness is a luxury I cannot afford." "What if I told you there was another option?" Xavier said, and Sarah heard him move closer. "What if I told you that over these 3 days I have come to care for you? That I think you are brave and intelligent and beautiful, and that I would like the chance to court you properly?" Sarah turned, her heart pounding. "Xavier, you do not know what you are saying. You barely know me." "I know enough," he said, his gray eyes intense. "I know that you make me laugh, that you are not afraid of hard work, that you have been dealt a difficult hand and yet you face it with grace. I know that I do not want to watch you ride away to marry a man who sees you as nothing more than a convenient arrangement." "And what exactly are you offering?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Another convenient arrangement. A ranch wife to cook and clean and bear children." "I am offering you a choice," Xavier said. "Stay here. Let me court you. If after a few months you decide you do not want to be with me, I will personally escort you to San Francisco with enough money for a fresh start anywhere you choose. But give us a chance, Sarah. Give me a chance to prove that you deserve more than a loveless marriage to a man who bought you sight unseen." Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling. It was madness. She had known this man for 3 days. But in those 3 days, she had felt more alive, more herself, than she had in the 2 years since her father died and she began the slow slide into desperation. "I have nothing to offer you," she whispered. "No dowry, no connections, nothing but myself." "That is all I want," Xavier said, and he reached out to take her hand. "Just you, Sarah, if you are willing." Sarah looked down at their joined hands, his so much larger and rougher than hers, calloused from years of hard work. She thought about Marcus Whitfield, waiting in San Francisco for a bride who would never arrive. She thought about the life she would have had as a banker's wife, comfortable but empty. Then she thought about these 3 days in the line shack, the easy conversation and growing connection, the way Xavier looked at her like she was someone worth knowing rather than a problem to be solved. "Yes," she said, the word coming out barely above a whisper. "Yes, I am willing." The smile that broke across Xavier's face was like the sun coming out after the storm. He squeezed her hand gently. "You will not regret this, Sarah. I swear to you." They rode back to Yosemite that afternoon, Sarah seated in front of Xavier on his horse, his arms around her to hold the reins. The town was still digging out from the blizzard when they arrived, and their appearance together caused quite a stir. Xavier took Sarah directly to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, the only respectable lodging in town for a single woman, Mrs. Henderson was a formidable woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She took in Sarah's disheveled appearance and Xavier's protective stance and made her own conclusions. "Found yourself in trouble during the storm, did you, dear, Mrs. Henderson asked, her tone kind despite her knowing look. "Miss Patterson's stage overturned," Xavier explained. "I got her to safety in one of the line shacks up in the high country. I want to make it clear that I treated her with complete propriety the entire time." "I do not doubt it, Mrs. Henderson said, surprising them both. "Xavier York is one of the most honorable men I know. Come in, dear. Let us get you settled and into some proper clothes." Over the next few weeks, Xavier courted Sarah in the traditional manner despite the unconventional beginning to their relationship. He called on her at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house every afternoon, always with a chaperone present. They took walks through the snow-covered valley, wrapped in heavy coats and scarves, their breath creating clouds in the cold air. Xavier showed her the town, introducing her to the shopkeepers and families who made up the small community. Sarah found herself falling into the rhythm of life in Yosemite. It was different from Carson City, smaller and more isolated, but there was a warmth to the community that she had not experienced before. People looked out for one another here, helped when help was needed. She liked it more than she expected. Xavier talked about his ranch, describing the land with obvious love. He had 200 acres, he told her, with good grazing and a creek that ran year-round. The house was modest but solid, built by his father with his own hands. There were 2 hired men who helped with the heavy work, brothers named Tom and Jack Sullivan, who had worked for the York family for over a decade. "I want you to see it," Xavier said one afternoon as they sat in Mrs. Henderson's parlor, the older woman dozing in a chair nearby. "The ranch, I mean. I want you to see what your life would be like if you chose to stay." Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness. Seeing the ranch would make everything more real, more concrete, but she nodded her agreement. "I would like that." They rode out to the ranch the following Saturday, Mrs. Henderson accompanying them as chaperone despite her complaints about her old bones not being suited for horseback riding. The ranch was beautiful in its winter coat, the fields covered in snow, the mountains rising majestically in the background. The house was a two-story structure made of logs and stone, with a wide front porch and windows that caught the afternoon light. Inside, it was clean but sparse, clearly the home of a bachelor who spent more time outdoors than in. The furniture was practical and well-made, the kitchen functional if not fancy. There was a sitting room with a stone fireplace, a dining area, and upstairs, 3 bedrooms. "It needs a woman's touch," Xavier admitted, looking around as if seeing it through Sarah's eyes. "I am not much for decorating." "It is a good house," Sarah said honestly. "Solid and warm. That is more important than fancy curtains or wallpaper." She wandered through the rooms, imagining herself living here. She pictured herself cooking in the kitchen, reading by the fireplace, waking up in one of those upstairs bedrooms with sunlight streaming through the windows. It was not hard to imagine. In fact, it felt surprisingly natural. The Sullivan brothers joined them for dinner that evening, and Sarah found herself liking the 2 men immediately. Tom was the older of the 2, in his 40s, with a weathered face and kind eyes. Jack was younger, probably in his early 30s, with a quick smile and an easy laugh. They treated Xavier with respect but also with genuine affection, and they welcomed Sarah warmly. "About time Xavier found himself a good woman," Tom said, his tone teasing. "We were starting to think he was married to those cattle of his." "Tom, leave her alone," Xavier said, but he was smiling. "You will scare her off." "If she is scared off that easily, she is not the right one," Jack said, winking at Sarah. "But I do not think Miss Patterson scares easy." Sarah smiled, feeling more at ease than she had in a long time. These were good men, honest men. She could build a life here, she thought. She could be happy here. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah's feelings for Xavier deepened. He was unlike any man she had ever known, patient and kind, but also strong and capable. He treated her as an equal, valued her opinions, made her laugh. When he kissed her for the first time, a gentle brush of lips on the front porch of Mrs. Henderson's boarding house with the older woman watching from the window, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening onto a room filled with light. Spring came to the valley in a rush of color and warmth. The snow melted, revealing the green grass beneath. Wildflowers bloomed in riots of purple and yellow and red. The creek that ran through Xavier's property swelled with runoff, and the cattle grew fat on the fresh grass. It was a time of renewal, of new beginnings, and it felt appropriate somehow. Xavier proposed on a warm afternoon in April, down by the creek on his property. They had ridden out together, ostensibly to check on the cattle. But Sarah suspected he had ulterior motives when he steered them toward a particularly pretty spot where the water pooled deep and clear beneath a stand of cottonwood trees. He dismounted first and then helped her down, his hands lingering on her waist. "Sarah," he said, his voice serious, "I know I asked you once before to give us a chance, and you did. You have made these past months the happiest of my life. You are everything I ever hoped to find in a wife and more than I thought I deserved. I love you, Sarah Patterson, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you. Will you marry me?" Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, Xavier, I will marry you. I love you too." He kissed her then, properly this time, without a chaperone watching. It was a kiss that spoke of promise and passion, of a future they would build together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Xavier reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he said, slipping it onto Sarah's finger. "My father gave it to me before he died, told me to save it for the woman I would marry. I think he would have liked you very much." Sarah looked down at the ring, feeling the weight of it, the significance. "I wish I could have met him. He would have loved you," Xavier said with certainty. "Just like I do." They were married in June, in the small church in Yosemite with the entire town in attendance. Sarah wore a dress that Mrs. Henderson and several other women had helped her make, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Xavier wore his best suit, looking both handsome and slightly uncomfortable in the formal attire. The ceremony was conducted by Pastor Williams, who had known Xavier since he was a boy. When Xavier slipped a second ring onto Sarah's finger, speaking his vows in a voice that shook slightly with emotion, Sarah felt her heart swell with love and gratitude. She had come to this valley expecting nothing, fleeing toward a loveless marriage born of desperation. And instead she had found this, a true partnership with a man who loved her for herself. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food brought by every family in the area. There was music and dancing, and Sarah found herself passed from partner to partner as the men of Yosemite took turns dancing with the new Mrs. York. But her eyes always returned to Xavier, tall and solid at the edge of the crowd, watching her with such obvious love that it made her breath catch. When the sun began to set, and the guests finally started to depart, Xavier swept Sarah into his arms and carried her over the threshold of their home. Their home now, she thought with wonder. She was no longer alone in the world, no longer adrift. She had a home and a husband and a future that stretched out before her, full of possibility. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of one another that left them both breathless and amazed. Xavier was gentle with her, patient, making sure she felt cherished and desired. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed that had been his father's and was now theirs, and Sarah felt a contentment she had never known before. "I never thought I could be this happy," she whispered into the darkness. "After my father died and I lost everything, I thought happiness was something that happened to other people, not to me." Xavier pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Sarah. I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you get it." Sarah settled into her role as ranch wife with surprising ease. She had been raised on a ranch after all, and the work was familiar even if the scale was different. She took over the running of the household, bringing order and comfort to spaces that had been purely functional under Xavier's bachelor care. She sewed curtains for the windows, planted a vegetable garden, filled the house with small touches that made it a home rather than just a place to sleep. But she was not content to be only a housekeeper. Sarah had too much energy and intelligence to be confined to domestic tasks. She began helping Xavier with the bookkeeping, organizing his records and finding ways to make the ranch more profitable. She had a good head for numbers, better than Xavier's, and she quickly identified several areas where they were losing money unnecessarily. "We are paying too much for feed," she said one evening, looking over the ledgers. "If we bought in bulk from this supplier in Sacramento, instead of from the local merchant, we could save nearly 20%. Xavier looked over her shoulder at the figures she had written out. "I never thought of that. I have always just bought from Miller's store in town." "Loyalty is admirable," Sarah said, "but not when it costs us this much. We could use that savings to buy more cattle, expand the herd." Xavier wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Have I mentioned recently that you are brilliant?" Sarah laughed, leaning back against him. "Not in the last hour, at least." They implemented her suggestions, and over the following months the ranch began to show a healthier profit. Sarah felt a deep satisfaction in contributing to their success in tangible ways. This was a true partnership, she realized. Xavier valued her mind as much as her domestic skills, treated her as an equal partner in building their life together. Summer gave way to fall, and the valley transformed once again, the leaves turning gold and red, the air growing crisp. Xavier taught Sarah to ride better, to really ride, and they spent long afternoons exploring the land together. He showed her the high meadows where they would drive the cattle in summer, the hidden canyons and crystal-clear streams. The land was beautiful in a way that took her breath away, wild and untamed and magnificent. In October, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before she told Xavier. When the doctor confirmed it, she rode home barely able to contain her excitement. Xavier was in the barn when she arrived, mucking out stalls, his shirt sleeves rolled up and sweat glistening on his forehead despite the cool weather. "Xavier," she called from the doorway, unable to keep the smile from her face. He looked up, immediately reading something in her expression. "What is it? What happened?" "We are going to have a baby," Sarah said, the words tumbling out. "I saw the doctor in town and he confirmed it." "I am pregnant, Xavier. We are going to be parents." The pitchfork Xavier had been holding clattered to the ground. He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and swept her into his arms, spinning her around. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Sarah, we are going to have a baby," she laughed, clinging to him. "Careful, you will make me dizzy." He set her down gently as if she were made of glass. "Are you well? Do you need to sit down? Should you even be riding?" "I am fine," Sarah assured him. "The doctor said I am healthy and strong, and there is no reason I cannot continue my normal activities for several more months. You do not need to treat me like I am fragile." But Xavier could not help himself. Over the following weeks, he became almost comically protective. He insisted she rest more, that she not lift anything heavy, that she stay warm and eat enough. Sarah found it both endearing and exasperating. "I am not made of porcelain," she told him one evening when he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am not going to break." "I know," Xavier said, but he did not look convinced. "I just want to take care of you." Sarah softened, seeing the genuine worry in his eyes. She set down the basket and took his hands in hers. "You do take care of me, every single day, but you need to trust that I know my own limits. If I need help, I will ask for it." Xavier nodded, though she could tell he was still struggling with the urge to wrap her in cotton wool and keep her safe from all possible harm. It came from love, she knew, from the knowledge that he had already lost both his parents and could not bear the thought of losing her too. Winter returned to the valley, though not with the same fury as the previous year. The snows were gentler this time, beautiful rather than dangerous. Sarah spent her days preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, setting up a cradle in their bedroom. Mrs. Henderson and the other women of the town visited regularly, bringing gifts and advice, sharing their own experiences with pregnancy and childbirth. Sarah felt embraced by this community in a way she never had anywhere else. In Carson City, her family's fall from grace had made them pariahs, whispered about and avoided. Here, she was simply Sarah York, Xavier's wife, a valued member of the community. It was a gift she had not expected, this sense of belonging. The baby came in early May, a boy they named Samuel after Xavier's father. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Xavier paced the downstairs rooms while Mrs. Henderson and the doctor attended to Sarah upstairs. He could hear her cries of pain, and each one felt like a knife to his heart. He had never felt so helpless in his life. When the baby's first wail finally cut through the house, Xavier nearly collapsed with relief. Mrs. Henderson appeared at the top of the stairs, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son, Xavier, a healthy baby boy, and Sarah is tired but well." Xavier took the stairs 2 at a time, bursting into the bedroom to find Sarah propped up against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked exhausted but radiant, her face glowing with joy as she looked down at their son. "Come meet Samuel," she said softly, looking up at Xavier with tears in her eyes. Xavier approached slowly, almost reverently. He had helped birth countless calves and foals over the years, but this was different, overwhelmingly different. This was his son, his and Sarah's, a whole new person who had not existed before. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. Samuel had a shock of dark hair and was making small snuffling sounds, his little fists waving in the air. "He is perfect," Xavier whispered, reaching out to touch one impossibly small hand. Samuel's fingers immediately curled around Xavier's finger, gripping with surprising strength. "Hello, son. Welcome to the world." Sarah leaned against Xavier's shoulder, and for a moment they just sat there, the three of them, a family. All the struggles that had brought them to this point, all the pain and loss and desperate choices, they had led to this moment, to this perfect thing they had created together. "Thank you," Xavier said, pressing a kiss to Sarah's temple. "Thank you for him for this, for choosing me." "Thank you for finding me," Sarah replied. "For saving me from that storm, from that life I was running toward. I thank you with everything I am, Xavier. With my whole heart and my whole life." The first year of Samuel's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and joyful days. Sarah took to motherhood naturally, though she admitted to being exhausted most of the time. Xavier helped as much as he could, walking Samuel when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, marveling at every small development as their son grew and changed. Samuel was a happy baby, quick to smile and laugh. He had Xavier's gray eyes and Sarah's nose, and both of them spent countless hours trying to determine which other features he had inherited from whom. It was a delightful game with no winners, only the joy of watching their son become his own person. The ranch continued to thrive. Sarah's business acumen combined with Xavier's skill at ranching made them one of the most successful operations in the valley. They were able to hire 2 more men, expand the herd, and even purchase an additional 50 acres adjacent to their property. They were building something lasting, something they could pass on to Samuel and any other children they might have. When Samuel was 2 years old, Sarah became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. She continued to help with the ranch work almost until the day she delivered, ignoring Xavier's protests that she should be resting. Their second child, a daughter they named Catherine after Sarah's mother, arrived on a warm summer evening. The labor was shorter this time, only a few hours, and Sarah felt strong enough to be sitting up and nursing the baby by the time Xavier was allowed to meet his daughter. Catherine was smaller than Samuel had been, more delicate, with wisps of blonde hair and blue eyes that would eventually turn green. Xavier fell in love instantly, holding his daughter with the same awe and wonder he had felt when Samuel was born. "We make beautiful children," he said, grinning at Sarah. "We do," she agreed, watching her husband cradle their daughter. "We really do." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm over the following years. The children grew, Samuel becoming a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, desperate to help with the ranch work. Catherine was quieter, more thoughtful, with her mother's love of books and learning. Sarah taught both children to read and write, using the education her mother had given her to ensure her own children had the same advantages. In the evenings, after the children were in bed, Xavier and Sarah would sit on the front porch, watching the sun set over the valley. These were Sarah's favorite moments, the peaceful end to busy days, sitting side by side with the man she loved, comfortable in their shared silence. "You ever think about what would have happened if I had gone to San Francisco?" Sarah asked one evening, breaking the quiet. "If I had married Marcus Whitfield like I was supposed to?" Xavier was quiet for a moment, his hand tightening around hers. "I try not to think about it. The idea of you with another man living a different life, it is too painful." "I would have been miserable," Sarah said with certainty. "Oh, I would have been comfortable probably, well provided for. But I would have been empty inside. You gave me a real life, Xavier. You gave me love and partnership and a home where I truly belong. I thank you for that every single day." "You do not need to thank me," Xavier said, pulling her closer so she could rest her head on his shoulder. "You saved me just as much as I saved you. I was so lonely before you came into my life, Sarah. I had the ranch and good work and good friends, but I was lonely in a way I did not even realize until I met you. You filled a space in my life I did not know was empty." They added to their family over the years, 2 more children, another boy and another girl. The house that had seemed so spacious when Sarah first saw it was now filled with noise and laughter, with the chaos of a growing family. Xavier expanded the house, adding more bedrooms and a larger kitchen, hiring a woman from town to help Sarah with the housework so she could continue to help with the ranch business. The children grew into capable, confident people, shaped by their parents' love and example. Samuel inherited his father's skill with animals and his mother's head for business. Catherine became a teacher, opening a small school in Yosemite for the children of the valley. Their younger children found their own paths, one becoming a rancher like his father, the other marrying a shopkeeper and settling in Sacramento. Xavier's hair turned gray at the temples, and lines deepened around his eyes and mouth. Sarah developed silver streaks in her dark hair and laugh lines that spoke of years of joy. They grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year, weathered and strengthened like wood aged in the sun. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch. The whole valley turned out, 3 generations now of families who had built their lives in this beautiful, isolated place. There was music and dancing, and a feast that covered 3 long tables set up in the yard. Xavier stood up to give a speech, pulling Sarah to her feet beside him. "25 years ago," he began, his voice carrying across the crowd, "I found a woman trapped in an overturned stagecoach during the worst blizzard this valley had ever seen. I pulled her out of that wreckage and took her to a lined shack to wait out the storm, and in those 3 days, I fell in love. Sarah Patterson, now Sarah York, you have given me the most amazing life. You have been my partner in every sense of the word, my equal and my complement. You have given me children who make me proud every single day, and you have made our ranch into something far greater than I could have achieved alone. But more than that, you have made me happy. Every single day for 25 years, I have woken up grateful that you chose me, that you stayed." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as Xavier spoke. When he finished, she stood on her tiptoes to kiss him, not caring that their children and the entire valley were watching. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." The party lasted late into the night, but eventually the guests departed, and Xavier and Sarah were left alone on their front porch, watching the stars come out over the valley. Sarah leaned against her husband, feeling the solid warmth of him, the comfort of his presence that had become as essential to her as breathing. "Do you remember that first night in the lined shack?" she asked. How awkward we were, how unsure, Xavier chuckled. I remember thinking you were the bravest woman I had ever met. You were so calm, so determined to survive. I was terrified, Sarah admitted, but you made me feel safe. Even then, when we were still strangers, you made me feel like everything would be all right. It turned out more than all right, Xavier said. It turned out perfect. And it had, Sarah thought. Oh, they had faced challenges over the years. There had been hard winters and drought summers, cattle lost to disease, financial worries, and family illnesses. But they had faced everything together, supporting each other through the difficult times, celebrating together during the good times. Sarah had thanked Xavier with her devotion every day of their marriage, in big ways and small. She had stood beside him through every challenge, had built a life and a legacy with him, had given him children and partnership and unwavering love. And Xavier had returned that devotion tenfold, proving every day through his actions and his words that he cherished her, that he saw her as his equal and his treasure. As they sat together in the peaceful darkness, Sarah reflected on the strange path that had brought her to this place. If that storm had not come when it did, if Xavier had been riding a different route, if she had not agreed to stay and let him court her, everything would have been different. She would have married Marcus Whitfield, or perhaps she would have frozen to death in that overturned coach, never knowing what real love felt like. But fate, or providence, or simple chance had brought them together, and they had built something beautiful from that chance meeting. Sarah had gone from desperate and alone to blessed beyond measure, and she owed it all to the cowboy who had heard her cries for help over the howling wind and had not turned away. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growing generations. Xavier and Sarah became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching their legacy expand in ways they could never have imagined. The ranch remained in the family, passed down to Samuel and then to his children, each generation adding their own touches while maintaining the foundation that Xavier and Sarah had built. On a warm spring day in 1929, 50 years after the blizzard that changed everything, Xavier York died peacefully in his sleep, Sarah's hand clasped in his. He was 75 years old, and he had lived a full and rich life surrounded by people who loved him. Sarah was devastated by his loss, the grief of it nearly overwhelming. They had been together for half a century, partners in every sense of the word, and the world felt emptier without him in it. But Sarah was not alone in her grief. She was surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them products of the love story that had begun in that winter storm. They mourned together, celebrated Xavier's life together, and supported Sarah as she learned to navigate a world without her husband. Sarah lived another 5 years after Xavier's death, years filled with family and memories and quiet contentment. She told stories to her great-grandchildren about their great-grandfather, about the day he saved her from the blizzard, about the 3 days in the lined shack that changed both their lives. She wanted them to know where they came from, to understand the love and sacrifice and devotion that had built the life they now enjoyed. When Sarah York died in her sleep in 1934, at the age of 77, she was surrounded by 3 generations of family. Her last words were about Xavier, calling for him with a smile on her face. The family liked to think that he had been waiting for her, ready to welcome her home after their brief separation. They buried Sarah next to Xavier on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the shade of an ancient oak tree. The entire valley turned out for the funeral, honoring the woman who had become a cornerstone of their community. At the reception afterward, held at the ranch that Sarah and Xavier had built together, the grandchildren shared stories about their grandmother, about her intelligence and her strength, about the way she had loved their grandfather with her whole heart until the very end. Samuel, now an old man himself, stood at the window looking out over the land his parents had loved so much. His own grandson, a boy of 8 named Xavier after his great-grandfather, came to stand beside him. "Tell me again about how great-grandfather saved great-grandmother," the boy said, slipping his hand into Samuel's. Samuel smiled, his eyes misty with memory. It was the winter of 1879, and the worst blizzard anyone had ever seen swept through this valley. Your great-grandmother was trapped in an overturned stagecoach, and your great-grandfather heard her cries for help. He pulled her from the wreckage and took her to shelter, and in doing so, he saved both their lives. Because from that moment on, they belonged to each other. She thanked him with a lifetime of devotion, and he returned it with every breath he took until the day he died. "That is the best love story ever," the boy said with certainty. Samuel nodded, pulling his grandson close. "It really is. And it all started because your great-grandfather did not turn away when he heard someone in need. He chose to help, and that choice created all of this family, this legacy. Never forget that, son. Never forget that one moment of courage and compassion can change everything." The boy nodded solemnly, taking in the wisdom of his grandfather's words. Around them, the family continued to gather, multiple generations brought together by the love of two people who had met during the worst storm anyone could remember, who had chosen each other against all odds, and who had built something that would last long after they were gone. The ranch continued for many more years, remaining in the family through depressions and wars and changing times. The house was eventually added to the National Register of Historic Places, recognized as one of the oldest continuously operated family ranches in California. Tourists would sometimes stop to take pictures, and the family would tell them about Xavier and Sarah York, about the blizzard and the rescue, and the love story that followed. The story became part of the valley's history, passed down through generations, embellished sometimes, but always true at its core. It was a reminder that sometimes the worst circumstances can lead to the best outcomes, that love can bloom in the most unlikely places, that devotion and partnership can build something that lasts beyond a single lifetime. The winter storm still came to Yosemite Valley, sweeping down from the mountains with fury and power. But now, when they came, people would remember the blizzard of 1879, the storm that brought Xavier York and Sarah Patterson together. They would remember the cowboy who saved the woman, and the woman who thanked him with a lifetime of devotion, and they would smile at the romance of it, at the beauty of a love that had lasted through all the seasons of a long and well-lived life. In the end, that was their legacy, not just the ranch they built or the children they raised, but the love they shared, honest and true and enduring. It was a love that had weathered every storm, that had grown stronger with each passing year, that had created ripples extending far beyond their own lives. Xavier and Sarah York had proven that real love was not just passion or romance, but partnership and respect and the daily choice to honor and cherish one another. Their story lived on, told and retold, a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and devotion. And in that way, they never really died at all. They lived on in the family they created, in the land they shaped, and in the hearts of everyone who heard their story and believed, even for a moment, in the possibility of true and lasting love. The seasons continued their eternal cycle in the valley, winter giving way to spring, spring to summer, summer to fall, and back to winter again. The creek still ran through what had been Xavier's property. The mountains still rose majestically in the background, and the land still held the imprint of two people who had loved it and each other with everything they had. The story of the cowboy and the woman he saved would continue to be told as long as there were people in the valley to tell it. A reminder that sometimes, in the midst of the worst storms, we find exactly what we need to survive. And if we are very lucky, we find something even more precious. We find love that lasts a lifetime and beyond. Love that becomes legend. Love that reminds us all what it means to truly devote ourselves to another person with our whole hearts and our whole lives, from the first moment to the very last.